Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to. It's time to talk about the biggest letdown. Second biggest. One of the biggest. A bad movie. Man on the Moon. Now you might be saying to yourself, what an odd movie to pick on. The 1999 biography on entertainer Andy Kaufman may not have been a box office smash, but it got decent enough reviews from critics and audiences praising the life of the legendary comedian and the performances that brought it to life. With game-changing talents like Milos Forman directing, writers Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski penning the script, and one of my favorite childhood idols, Jim Carrey, bringing a damn good impression to the screen, why does this deserve such a bashing years later? Well, if you know Andy Kaufman's work, you probably saw this movie as okay. If you know Andy Kaufman's life, you saw this as a huge botched opportunity. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm aware biographical movies have to take creative license when translating a person's story to the big screen. Ed Wood is one of my favorite movies, despite many parts of it being false. Bohemian Rhapsody has a ton of bullshit in it, but I still thought it was okay. Even Annabelle Creation, the spin-off of the spin-off of the sequel of the true story that's clearly 90% horse crap, I still kind of enjoyed. So indulging in cinematic elements that didn't happen, I'm actually okay with. It's a movie. You gotta make an interesting story crammed in a 2-hour running time. There's gotta be some changes.
I suppose you want to talk about my documentary where I act like a raging douche.
No, Jim Carrey represented by my bad impression, I do not. Though, why did you act like such a douche?
Oh, that wasn't me, the fun-loving Jim Carrey everybody adores. No, that was Woka-Crit Carrey.
Woka-Crit?
My enlightened alter ego that acts like he discovered the meaning of life, but is really using his insecurities to judge people and act like he's better than them. He's over there, actually. Critic, you know you're not really here.
But I am.
Oh, maybe to your eyes, but to my evolved vision, we are nothing but ideas.
Okay, whatever.
Oh, and don't ever use a gun again in your reviews.
Don't you use guns in a ton of your movies?
Well, that's before I became better than you, or maybe I'm playing a character right now, I'm so complex. We call it Russell Brand syndrome.
No, believe it or not, this actually has very little to do with the documentary that came out about the making of this movie, Jim and Andy, where Jim Carrey Jared Leto'd everyone by pestering and even sabotaging the movie set, claiming he was possessed by Andy Kaufman. That's another can of worms, but it will come up briefly later. The big issue I have with the movie is that elements of Andy's life were made up when they simply didn't need to be. The actual life of Andy Kaufman was really interesting, strange, heartbreaking, and even charming. Kaufman was arguably one of the first big troll comedians, playing with expectations, flip-flopping between making the crowd laugh and annoying the hell out of them. But somehow he did it with a surreal yet infuriating logic that somehow made sense, even if it was only to him. While there were big budget groups that dabbled in similar comedy, this was mostly what Kaufman focused on, inspiring many great comedians to create their own style of anti-humor. So a movie about this man should be both interesting and funny. So why, in my opinion, did it miss what the spirit of Kaufman was about? Well, let's take a closer look. This is Man on the Moon. The film starts off, honestly, pretty great, with Carrey doing Kaufman's foreign-man character warning you that big chunks of the movie had been made up for dramatic effect.
I decided to cut out all of the baloney.
In fact, he hated it so much they cut it down. In fact, it's a lot shorter. In fact, it's over. He plays the theme to Lassie and the credits roll. The theme isn't even very long, so he constantly has to start it over as the credits stop with it. This is friggin' wonderful. A routine Kaufman himself would no doubt really enjoy. But then this happens. He stops in the middle of it. We look at a black screen of silence for about 12 seconds, and then Kaufman comes out in his normal voice to say it was just a means to get rid of the people who wouldn't understand him.
Actually, the movie is really great.
You know, remember when I said I'd go back to that Jim and Andy documentary? I can't help but think of one line in particular Jim Carrey said when he was Daniel Douche Lewising everybody.
How far should I take this? How far would Andy take it?
Good question, Jim. Well, for starters, Andy wouldn't have stopped the credits halfway through. If anything, he would make them go longer. He'd have that record continue to skip and slow everything down. Maybe the record would scratch and break and he has to get it back up and the credits would start all over again. But he would play those credits all the way through. How far would Andy take it? He would have the Universal logo shine at the end, along with the rating of the film that used to pop up afterwards. How far would Andy take it? He would try to have every theater that showed this movie bring up the house lights. Some would be confused and maybe even leave, and he would wait a good 2 minutes minimum to give them time to exit or leave others to talk about what the hell was going on. Then he would peek his head out and the story would begin.
How far would Andy take it?
That far. That's how far Andy would take it. So already, from the very start, there's kind of an understanding of what Andy is about, but it's not being presented. Don't get me wrong, maybe this was an idea and the studio said no, saying they could only do the credit bit for a certain amount of time. First of all, Carrie was so popular at the time, to get away acting like this, that he could have pulled some strings to make this happen, or as far as it could plausibly go. Second, it's unlikely they ever planned to go all the way with this bit because the rest of the movie kinda has a half-assed quality to it. Maybe it's because they didn't know what they were doing, maybe it's because the studio got in the way, maybe it's because Jim got in the way, but it clearly rides throughout the majority of the film. Take, for example, starting off in his childhood. We see a young Andy performing skits alone in his room, which is totally true. He didn't play with many kids and liked to pretend there was a camera in the walls, which concerned his parents. He's told he needs to play with other children, so he does the exact same thing, just dragging his little sister in, played by Kaufman's real granddaughter, Brittany.
Cat goes meow, meow.
So, anyone that's read an Andy Kaufman biography knows what's next. He gets past his shyness by performing at kids' birthday parties, he gets drafted by the military but fails the psych evaluation, gets addicted to drugs and has a child out of wedlock, giving her up for adoption. And when he was at his most lost, addicted to drugs and loneliness, he completely turned his life around by discovering transcendental meditation, balancing out the darkest times of his life, allowing him to perform a kids' public access show, where he discovers doing the exact same act for children but for adults instead can be surprisingly hilarious, giving him the inspiration to try comedy, which would be a huge defining point in his life. Or he just goes to stand-up. Yep, all of that skipped, and we just go straight to him being a genius. How much of that would have translated so well into a movie? Failing the military psych test, creating concern for him as a troubled outcast. Getting lost to drugs and showing the struggle of him trying to get his life together. Having a child and giving her up, showing maybe how he could have longed for simpler, innocent realities. And even the almost accidental ways that longing for a simpler outlook created his act and arguably who he is. The essence of where Kaufman's act and Kaufman himself came from, explored like any decent biography would do. Nope. Just genius now, and nobody understands him.
I don't know, Andy. I think I have to let you go.
You're firing me?
It seems a little ironic because that's Kaufman's actual manager, George Shapiro, playing the part of the club owner. In the film, he's confusingly played by Danny DeVito, who was on Taxi with Kaufman. Again, if this movie actually utilized Kaufman's comedy, they would have made a joke about that. In fact, Danny DeVito playing his character in the show Taxi doesn't seem to be anywhere. They just kind of act like he doesn't exist. Why didn't they make Shapiro play Danny DeVito on Taxi and never address it? In fact, don't even credit him. Just say Danny DeVito played himself. Oh my god, that would be hilarious and it would totally keep in Kaufman's humor. But nope, DeVito just plays the manager and they never mention or show Danny as the character on Taxi.
How far would Andy take it?
He'd totally avoid a confusing in-joke if he could. We see Shapiro witness Kaufman's classic foreign man becoming Elvis routine, and he decides to become his manager.
I've always wanted to play Carnegie Hall. You're insane. But you might also be brilliant.
As you quickly notice, this is not going to be an honest portrayal of the real struggles Andy went through. Rather, the Forrest Gump simple, beautiful genius who had everything figured out, we just had to catch up to him.
I want to be the biggest star in the world. I want to generate my own material. I don't want to go for cheap laughs. It's good old-fashioned entertainment, George.
You're so proud.
Some of us at Saturday Night Live think Andy Kaufman's a comic genius.
It's fun, George!
They detest you.
We're a success.
All the dialogue around him works this way, acting like he's the Mary Poppins of comedy, being 5 steps ahead, always in control, and leaving us shaking our heads saying, oh, how whimsical.
Because I'm gonna do it again and again and again and again and again.
Look, saying he's ahead of his time is fine. I'm a huge fan of his, and I thought he was ahead of his time. But treating him like a holier-than-thou poet rebel martyr fop just makes him less relatable. We can never be like him or understand him because he was truly perfect. No, he wasn't. And if this movie showed any of his faults, we not only see that, but it'd make him and this movie more interesting. But instead, a lot of the movie is just showing his routines. Almost in their entirety, even when it's not needed. And yeah, I know the irony that I said the opening should have gone all the way with a bit, and now I'm saying they should have scaled back on others. But these are routines you can see anywhere. Many fans already know them inside out, and even non-fans have a general idea of what they were. We're watching a Kaufman movie so we can discover what we didn't know about him, not what we've already seen a million times. And you know what? If you're gonna do it, show us the stuff we can't see. On the Dinah Shore show, he supposedly cracked eggs over her head and they got into a fight. Shore hated this so much that she had the footage burned. Why not recreate that? Get it as close as possible so people can not only see how far he pushed it, but also give fans a chance to see how it most likely went down. When the movie does talk about Kaufman's thoughts on his career, they do get the basics down. He did hate working on a sitcom and would butt heads with higher-ups about what he can do on his own special. But once again, other things are changed around for seemingly no reason.
Are you Andy Kaufman? I get that all the time.
Andy did work as a busboy twice a week, but it wasn't because he was trying to quit Taxi. It was how he stayed creatively active, pretending to get in fights with friends who acted like they didn't know each other, but they acted like they were getting into this big brawl. And afterwards, they would have a big laugh about it. It was keeping himself creatively stimulated in a time where he felt he couldn't do it on air. Which would have been interesting to see him cope by doing something unconventional while he's forced to do something conventional. But here, they act like he's just doing it to protest ABC.
I'd rather work here than at ABC. I'm over and out.
You gotta deal with ABC. You gotta honor it.
This isn't nearly as fascinating as what actually happened. I also don't know how to take him reading The Great Gatsby to a crowd as punishment for them wanting to do his character from Taxi. He would read the entire book of The Great Gatsby as a common form of entertainment even if the crowd walked out. It wasn't a means of revenge, he just thought it was funny. If anything, even when a crowd was so bad to Andy, he still did the show as planned, saying even though he hated the audience, he still should act professional as possible and give them the show he promised.
Those people were so rude out there. And so anyway, I went on and I did what I was going to do anyway. And I went on with the show and I did it for them. And I was professional about it. But gosh, I felt like telling them they were rude.
Give me the book.
What book?
Give me the book. They're asking for it.
The stuff with Andy sleeping around and the Tony Clifton outburst seemed to be represented pretty well. And it is nice to see a recreation of him getting kicked off Taxi. Again, something I feel like the fans really wanted to see and the movie did deliver on. But again, we had to get a long, drawn-out version of one of his routines that a lot of people seeing the film already know. Only this time, instead of not knowing whether Andy believes what he's saying or not, you know he doesn't believe what he's saying here. When you see Andy taunt women to wrestle, he's portraying it as a person who really believes what he says. Where Carrie plays it like he knows he's acting like a jerk, which sucks out a fair amount of the comedy.
Now, I'm not saying women are mentally inferior to men because when it comes to things like cooking and cleaning, washing the potatoes, scrubbing the carrots, raising the babies, women are superior to men in many ways. It comes to cooking and cleaning and washing the potatoes, scrubbing the carrots, making the babies.
But that wasn't me playing Andy, that was Andy playing me. Playing Andy, playing me, playing Andy, playing a virtual character. Ooh, I'm deep.
I really like Original You better.
So does my box office.
Hey, Doug Walker here, letting you know some of the conventions we have coming up. From June 7th to 9th is Indie PopCon in Indianapolis, and you can get a discount on tickets if you just use the promo code AWESOME when purchasing them. From June 21st to the 23rd, we have Planet Funk in Iowa. This is our first time at this one, and sure to be a lot of fun. And from July 6th to 7th, it's Salt City Comic-Con at the New York State Fairgrounds in Syracuse, New York. We have even more conventions this year, but these are the ones coming up, so go to the site, get the tickets, drop on by, and say hi. Would love to see you. Movie's 25-minute section dedicated to Andy wrestling women and his run-in with Jerry Lawler, we do at least get a little something the common person didn't know. Andy Kaufman's relationship with his arguably most faithful girlfriend, Lynn, played by Courtney Love, who I'm not convinced isn't paralleling Kaufman's life sometimes. The scenes are okay, but again, very short. Because again, a lot of the film has to be dedicated to moments you can see anywhere else.
I mean, what are you gonna do?
You know, it's interesting. Andy kept sleeping around even though he was in a serious relationship with Lynn. Lynn would even go on record saying this was very difficult to live with. Wouldn't that be interesting cinema? Diving into a part of Andy's life we didn't know? Ah, screw that shit. Remember when Andy did that? Remember when Andy did that? Of course you do, because you already saw it. Nobody wants to see anything new in a biography. Now, some of you might be making the argument that this is the point, keeping Andy's life a mystery so we never know the full him. Well, there's a right way to do that too. In the biography, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, Chuck Barris's book blended reality with fiction by revealing some things that really happened to him, but then made up a whole bunch of other shit, like he was a professional assassin. The movie version treats it like it all really happened, making it a very unique film. In Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it's legally fiction, but most of it's based on events that really happened. But the film still shoots it like a drug trip where either option, fact or fiction, could be plausible. In the movie Vincent, all it is a great actor reading his diary and showing the places that inspired him to paint. Even though it didn't give many details, it somehow gave me more insight into the person. These are films that tried something different and artistic while confusing you what really happened. Something Kaufman's humor was all about. Had Man on the Moon done something like that, I totally would have respected it just as much as a straightforward biography. Hell, maybe even more. But this is just routines he's already done with occasional glimpses into his life, which half the time is made up despite the real story being much more interesting. Take this moment when SNL asked their audience to vote if they want Kaufman to stay on or not, resulting in him getting voted off. This devastates Kaufman because in the movie, people don't like him. Isn't that the idea? He does stuff so people don't like him? How does this make any sense? It just comes out of nowhere.
This is Saturday Night Live, the hippest audience in television. This is bad.
Well, the truth is Kaufman was devastated, but not for the reason you think. You see, it wasn't Lorne Michaels who made the announcement, it was producer Dick Ebersol.
Andy Kaufman is not funny anymore. And I believe you, the audience here, agree with me.
Why does this matter? Because Ebersol made a deal with Kaufman. They planned the vote knowing full well that Andy would get voted off, much to his delight. It's what he wanted. But then later, Kaufman would surprise people by returning to SNL. Whether as a hero or a villain is unsure, but he was gonna come back to surprise people in some way. That's what the act was gonna be. Ebersol, however, never invited him back. So not only did the TV show that gave him a voice stab him in the back, but worse for Kaufman, one of his jokes would go unfinished. And with his OCD tendencies that even the movie kinda taps on, this must have driven him nuts. That's something we can see him getting genuinely upset about. But here, it's because people don't like him. Well, what did he care? The whole film they built up that he loved that, so this makes no sense. So you can't even get down the intent of his comedy half the time. Oh, and to make things dumber, they have this stupid reveal.
I don't think you two guys should ever work together again.
Sorry, George. We just thought it was funny.
Yeah, you see the way they edited that? Like they hold on Danny DeVito for a while, trying to make it look like he's talking to Andy and Bob Samuda, but really it's Andy and Jerry Lawler. Like, oh my god, Lawler was in on it! Lawler and Andy planned the whole thing! It was a hoax! It's wrestling! If there's anything people did need clarification on being a hoax, it was this! There's no part that shows them planning it out or putting it together. They just want us to believe that this was all really going on, I guess. Like, whoa, that was all planned? Sure shocked me. Oh, Jesus Christ, he admitted it!
I would have to say all these nasty things about women just to get them to come on stage and just to define for the audience that the audience should be booing me.
Why was that supposed to be a surprise? Here's another completely botched moment. Andy is kicked out of his transcendental meditation group, which seems to really put him in a bad funk.
I'm a bad person.
Now, as an audience member watching this, you'd probably be wondering, why is this such a big deal? I mean, you do see him meditate once or twice, he clearly takes it seriously, but again, he usually doesn't care what people think, so why is he wrapped up in bed staring at the ceiling over this? Well, again, if they treated this like an actual bioflake, you would know that he saw meditation as the reason he was still alive. He said it saved him from the world of drugs and insecurity and brought his life meaning and purpose. So, yeah, he probably would be bummed out being kicked from that, but absolutely none of that is represented here. Whatever big emotional response they could have gotten out of this is completely lost. He doesn't even act sad for very long. Lynn enters the room and he quickly asks if she wants to move in with him.
Do you want to move in with me?
Cut to her moving in with him. Sad meditation stuff over. So yeah, it fails as being both a small deal and a big deal somehow. How do you even accomplish that? But perhaps the biggest missed opportunity is when Andy Kaufman gets lung cancer. They skip the scene of him finding out from the doctor, which I guess is supposed to confuse us further. And as you'd expect, his own friends and family don't believe him.
Plans these things, he takes over and hires actors. You know, personally, I think that doctor guy was very convincing. I mean,
These scenes are done okay, and they do move his big Carnegie Hall performance to 1983 as opposed to 1979, long before he was diagnosed with anything. Believe it or not, I'm actually okay with this. Sure, it didn't happen in this order, but it's kind of like having the Queen Live Aid concert after Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with AIDS. It adds an extra poetic weight to it. It makes the scene better, which is expected for a bioflick. They change around a few things in the show, which again is fine as they're trying to condense it down. But here's where they drop the ball on an amazing scene they could have had. As in real life, Andy took the entire audience out for milk and cookies. In the movie, it stops there, but in reality, the people weren't leaving and Andy needed to tell them, playtime's over, it's time to go home. He shouted out,
The show will continue tomorrow at 1 o'clock at the Staten Island Ferry.
People laughed and applauded and went home. The next morning, his writer, Bob Samuda, woke him up, wondering if he was gonna go. Andy said the crowd knew it was a joke and nobody would be there, but then he thought about the 1 or 2 fans that might have confused what he said for real and show up there all alone. So he got dressed, went to the Staten Island Ferry, and sure enough, there were over 300 people there. Andy was speechless. For the first time ever, the audience had pulled one over on him. People kind of figured out he didn't really have anything planned, but they didn't care. If anything, it made it better. The crowd fooled him for once. He bought the people ice cream cones, sung a few songs, even did a little wrestling. But this was the first time he was fooled by an entire crowd. Not because of spite, but because of love. Love for his comedy, love for his work, and love for him. How epic would that have been in a movie? It's pretty much the highlight of the entire flick. You can make it even bigger. 300? Why not make it the entire crowd that showed up? You've lied about other things, why not lie about this to make the moment even grander and bigger? This could have been the big tear-jerking scene. But instead, we have a different way he was fooled, which also sadly did happen. Andy was convinced that a healer scam artist could take the cancer out of him, but discovers it's bogus. Again, it's not a bad scene, and I kinda like him laughing, as in this version he discovers it while he's there. But then it just jumps to him being dead. This dissolve is so weirdly empty. Honestly, truth be told, a lot of the edits in this movie are. They don't flow in a natural way. They seem to more stop a scene rather than end it. It often looks like it's interrupting a moment in the middle rather than organically transitioning to the next part of the story.
he didn't even have doctor shoes.
No.
He's definitely not dying.
But seriously, for the grand touchy-feely tone this movie is trying to go for, the Staten Island Ferry scene would have been such a high mark to go out on. You know what, screw it, since you're switching a bunch of other stuff around, why didn't you switch those two around? Maybe have Kaufman go get the false treatment earlier in his sickness, like while he still has hair and everything. He finds out he's been fooled in an awful way, but then he goes home to do the show where he finds he's been fooled in a loving way. Imagine you just saw that scene with everyone cheering his arrival to Staten Island. He's so touched to see all the people there cheering him. They finally fooled him. It's come full circle. And then you dissolve to him in the casket. How much more powerful would that have been? What an incredible contrast of both sadness and joy. However, we get the edit we got, and the film ends with Tony Clifton returning 1 year later singing I Will Survive, never revealing who actually played him. An okay ending to what could have been an emotional powerhouse of a movie.
But you have to admit it's what Andy would have wanted. I know, I was him for 5 seconds just now.
You know, that's another reason I brought up your soul-possessing performance. If you really cared about representing Andy Kaufman correctly, why didn't you focus on making his story more interesting rather than making your story more interesting?
Well, I'm just an actor. I don't have that kind of power.
You stopped production several times on this flick. I'm sure you could have pulled some strings and said, hey, maybe we can make this more faithful.
Are you saying I made this movie bad?
No. Actually, your acting's pretty decent in this.
Oh, good, as long as I get attention.
But like a lot of people who made this movie or even saw this movie, the focus seems to be in the wrong place. Man on the Moon doesn't help you understand an artist or his art any better.
If anything, it makes you understand it less because they changed so much of how he performed his art and the reasons why. Like I said before, I wouldn't mind too much if it made for a better story. But Kaufman's story was already interesting, and the changes made surprisingly make it boring. It's like they felt they had to put changes in because that's what biopics do, despite the changes not being all that needed in this case. I guess in hindsight it's not an awful film, the acting is still good, and there's a few times they start to capture Kaufman's spirit, but it never comes close to going all the way with it. And Kaufman was all about going all the way with a routine, no matter how much trouble it got him in. If you like the film, more power to you. If it got you to look up more about Andy Kaufman, fair enough. Like I said before, I don't really hate this film as a standalone flick. I hate it because of what it could have been, what it should have been. It's not one of the worst films ever made, not by a long shot. But it is one of the biggest letdowns. What should have been one of the easiest stories to make heart-grabbingly touching, fascinatingly weird, or both, turns out an underwhelming best-of compilation that's not even that great a best-of compilation.
You know, maybe I have been trying a little too hard to be deep.
Indeed, if there's anything Andy Kaufman has taught us, or this movie for that matter, it's that the best art comes when you're being honest to yourself, no matter how weird you are.
What do you say we go back to our roots and just try to bring people joy?
I would like that.
Well, I can see this turning out just oh my god. I'm the nostalgia critic, and I'm afraid we're all gonna remember that.
They're going to do a redesign?
Yeah, that'll save it.
Hey, Doug Walker here. Hope for the Warriors is this week's charity shoutout. Hope for the Warriors provides comprehensive support programs for service members, veterans, and military families. They're focused on transition, health awareness, peer engagement, and connections to community resources. They believe those touched by military service can succeed at home by restoring their sense of self, family, and hope. Their core values understand the challenges, pride, and joy of being a military family. They strive to meet the changing needs of those who served and the families who showed support right alongside them. Because Hope for the Warriors believes in family, united by the shared conviction of honor and sacrifice. If you look at their site, you can see all the good they accomplish and all the brave men and women who have given up so much so that we can live the lives that we live. If you want to show your thanks, click on the link and share how much you appreciate all that they have given us.